Hello everyone. We are continuing our NFT University education sessions. And today, for the first section of our session, we have an amazing guest speaker who I absolutely admire and respect. And his name is Abraham. He's an NFT analyst and works with many successful projects. It was interesting when I invited him to our session today as a guest speaker and presented what our project is doing and what we do in terms of NFT education. His exact words were, sounds like a really good thing you folks are doing. And he accepted invitation without any hesitation, which again speaks to his professionalism and his genuine desire to contribute to building this space. We appreciate it so much, Abraham. We love that you are here with us today. You could be in many places. He is highly sought after. He is very respected in this space. Actually, if you followed his Twitter page, which I posted in my announcement a few days ago, you would see that today he announced that he will be heading up an alpha section for a very successful project. So again, we appreciate that you choose to be with us today. And I know that I personally look forward to listening to your insights in NFT market. But before we start this specific discussion, I wanted to ask a couple questions regarding your background. I know you have a degree in theoretical physics and engineering background. So I was wondering how you got started into NFTs, how your journey started.
Yeah, well, so first of all, thank you so much for having me as well. And yeah, always really happy to do these, to do any kind of knowledge sharing and learning, because I think it's honestly one of the most important ways that we can bring more people into this community is to educate them properly about what it is, because there's so many pitfalls and there's so many things to learn. But yeah, so like as you mentioned, my background is obviously very, very different, and I think to most people, most people when they come into this space, I don't think have a solid background in crypto or NFTs, but they sort of find their way into it, and that's what I absolutely love about the whole NFT space right now. So yeah, I studied physics, theoretical physics here in London at university, and then I quickly moved over sort of to software engineering and software development within my career, and it wasn't for a few years until I sort of started spotting you know, the kind of the growing crypto trend over the last couple of years that I started getting interested in the idea of NFTs. I think the biggest thing that kind of appealed to me was that what really fascinates me about NFTs is that they have a narrative behind them, right? They have a story behind them, and that's what I just absolutely admire, because I always love speaking about kind of the importance of story to kind of just to humanity and to humans in general. I am an avid gamer. I love playing things like Dungeons and Dragons, and you know, and I still do like play lots of Dungeons and Dragons and running stories. And I always love to say like this, you know, honestly, people immediately attach and relate to stories because that's how we build up our societies. That's how we, and so when I saw the movement of NFTs kind of coming off the back of crypto is great and all, but there is no narrative behind crypto. I mean, you know, Ethereum is just a coin and Bitcoin is just a coin, and people build their own community and things around those. But that's the thing that gripped me immediately with NFTs, is that actually every single NFT, I mean, a picture says a 1,000 words kind of deal, you know, and more than that, NFTs became these, I loved watching the movement. I really started like kind of getting more and more engaged with the space, because I could really see that NFTs were actually forming narrative communities around them, with people shared in a similar narrative and shared in sort of like, and could come together around the kind of the shared ideas, which I just thought was brilliant, and that's how I got into them.
Absolutely amazing. I can relate to that totally. But also what I wanted to ask, do you have any artistic background? Because when I saw your first one-page review of an NFT project, I was amazed how absolutely well done it was, not only analytically, but also artistically. I'm just wondering where that is coming from.
No, honestly, I have zero background in graphic design, and I really appreciate the kind words. I think I think you're being too kind, because I don't. There's still so many mistakes that I spot even nowadays. Like I'll give the way they started is I know that obviously I wanted to start in the space, and I didn't really know how to make myself stand out. So I thought to myself, well, if I make my analysis, because I wasn't the first analyst on the space for sure, and I'm definitely not. Definitely not that important compared to some of the other ones that are some of the other influencers out there. But what I try to do is I try to present things in a simple to understand manner, and just sort of like to visually break them down, because I know that blocks and blocks of text are just really hard to digest. So I just tried creating something that I would have appreciated when I started off in the space, and yeah, it seems to have really like resonated well with different projects, and yeah, it's like those kind of infographics are really taking off now.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so for the topic of our discussion today, I wanted to get your perspective on NFT market in general, macro view of it, and then how do you analyze project fundamentals? Because again, you do it so well, and you do it for many projects now in your official capacity of NFT analyst.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and it's the current space, the way that so if we were to start with the question of where do we see this current space moving and how it's evolving, NFTs are not necessarily new per se, in the sense that they the first few NFTs conceptually launched years and years ago, right? Like the concept for an NFT has existed for a while, for several years now, but they never took off up until sort of it's like the tail end of 2019, 2020, when people started realizing just the power that they do possess. And that's and I'll sort of speak about that a little bit more when it comes to analyzing NFT projects. But then in 2021, I think that's when most people started onboarding, that most people in the current community started onboarding onto NFTs, and we started seeing jumps from like 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 monthly active users in the space, trading and selling and buying NFTs. It started jumping into 200,000, 500,000 by around sort of mid to end 2021, and now we're seeing over 1 million as it sort of almost overnight as we hit 2022. Right. We've seen like almost a doubling of the market very, very quickly. And I keep saying this to people, you're still just at the start, like you're so early. If you start to look at how big NFTs are, and again, like all the utility that they can offer, and just the fact that people are just starting to figure out what they can do with NFT, like the full scope of them, right? Like the initial sense of like the initial way that an NFT was used, I think in the most kind of and the most successful use case was for community purposes, right? Like Bored Ape Yacht Club going, okay, you hold this NFT, you become part of this community, and it just became this exclusive club. And that idea is actually age old. We've had exclusive like gentlemen's clubs all the way, hundreds and hundreds of years back, and like the Freemasonries and all those types of like different societies that would form exclusive memberships. People want to be part of groups, people want to be part of memberships and part of these exclusive communities. But that was just the start, I think, of the NFT space. Now community has almost become like this core bedrock of every NFT project, and it's all these other utilities that are coming now onto the space that is what NFTs are now using. The NFT projects are now using in order to separate themselves. Like what kind of community is it? Why should I be part of this community versus that community? And what other kind of utility, what other value can I get out of owning or holding this NFT? So yeah, that's kind of like because we're just so early and people are just still figuring this out. In the macro space, the macro scheme of things, I mean, I know people have been starting to panic recently because we've hit such high numbers in January. I mean, whenever you go super high, you're going to have to slow down a little bit. And so we saw like over the last couple of weeks and last week and now in February, this huge slowdown in the NFT space, and like prices are going down and people are panicking and selling and just kind of trying to get rid of their NFTs, and it's like and consolidating. But well, it's sort of just this part of this kind of process of this part of this natural progression of like how NFTs are going to evolve over time into I think the first major milestone is going to be that we get to a state where NFT projects have a more like the NFT projects that are launching, that we see launching now, because we see so many new people coming into the space, because we see so much new money flowing into the space, and it's just going to keep growing. We see a lot of NFT projects taking advantage of that, not building something properly, just doing cash grabs, doing scams. I mean, we saw one of the biggest scams executed with Squiggles just a week ago, 250,000 people on Twitter, you know, unparalleled amounts of hype, and the warning signs were there. And it's because the space is so new and so ripe, and so this is one of my biggest like problems with it right now, and one of the reasons I love like just making sure that I can talk to the different communities and just warning them and educating them so they can spot they can, you know, spot things like the Squiggles rug or any type of other kind of I think those projects will eventually fall away, right? I think there will always be bad actors, but the most like the more mature the NFT space becomes, as we sort of move into the sort of the longer period, and as we start to see the maturing of this NFT space, which we're already seeing now, those projects are going to be harder and harder to justify. People are going to have new expectations. They're going to we're going to grow out of those types of projects. We're going to go out of projects that are literally copy pastes of other projects, like exact like for like derivative type projects that are just doing everything exactly the same without offering any extra utility, without offering anything new, without offering anything really.
And so quickly too, right? Right after one project comes out and is successful, next day you can see all of these mushroom projects.
Exactly. Like when Azuki launched 2 weeks later, we've had about 5 clones, and 2 weeks later, a week later after that, we had 10 different clones all launching like very rapidly, and they're still now like, you know, on the roadmap. And I've spoken to a couple of their founders, and I've just been like, okay, it's great to try to ride on the hype and that Azuki generated and the success that Azuki generated, but you have to be realistic with yourself. Or why would people want to put their hard-earned money into this? Because you're clearly not going to be another Azuki. You can't start from the assumption of we're Azuki but doing this instead. No, you have to build your own identity, right? That's I think what people are going to start looking for, is like what makes that project special. And so that's I think where we're going to start moving in the macro space, especially as more people come from the outside, more from the outside. And it's really interesting because so many new people are coming and becoming interested in this space. I've been speaking to a lot of kind of new big investors as well that are coming and that are bringing a lot of money. Like they are successful business entrepreneurs in the like conventional Web2 space, if you like, right? They've run their investment and hedge funds. They've done like, or maybe some of them have like, now we're seeing this transition of DeFi investors who have made a lot of money in like DeFi back in when crypto DeFi was blowing up, and now are moving into NFTs, and then they're bringing in people like, you know, there's a project that just launched, and it's launching with like the ex-president of Burberry, the head of Marks and Spencers, you know, like a really conventional type heads and presidents who are just coming into the space because they're seeing the exponential growth, and they bring with them a brand new set of like utility and value that we haven't explored yet in this space, right? And so that's what I'm really curious to watch, is I think we're going to see so many of these new big NFTs come up, you know, like we've already seen the Nike and Adidas and Budweiser and Tiger Beer, like loads of like these brands coming in, right? We're going to start seeing bigger and bigger players bringing in and completely changing the landscape and changing the definition of what utility for them looks like, and what like a project of that caliber potentially looks like.
Absolutely, 100%. What we also discussed during our first session was those use cases for NFTs, for science, for art, for sport. For every domain of our life, NFTs are going to transform how we see digital ownership today. It's going to be so different as we grow, as you said. So how do you specifically analyze NFT projects, their fundamentals? How do you spot those rugs that you just mentioned? How can we help communities to learn those types of fundamental analysis?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One of the the most difficult things I think to do in this space is to try and learn what constitutes a good project and what constitutes a project that's just going to pull the rug from under your feet. And to that end, I've been trying to educate as much as I can along the way of sort of the giveaway signs that people can latch onto, because the truth is, honestly, you can, there's a lot of research that you can do into a project to figure out whether the project is solid or not. And the problem is that we've had lots of projects launch and do relatively well without some of those solids behind them, like just purely based on hype. They've done super, super well. And so people use that as a precedent to go, well, you know, these guys didn't, for instance, one way that I always say is like, make sure that you have some basis to go off when it comes to the founders. Have they shown their face in public? Have they decided to dox themselves? If they haven't doxed themselves, it's not an immediate no, but dox teams stake their own reputation, right, and their own brand, everything else on the line. And so it's much, much harder to then walk away with a scam in that space, right? But because we've had so many NFT projects launching, and still other NFT projects now launching and continue to launch without founders doxing themselves, well, it's not a hard requirement because so many of these projects have done so well. I mean, Board A wasn't doxed forever, and in fact, they were involuntarily doxed, I believe. And a couple of projects were involuntarily doxed by people digging around and trying to sort of find evidence of who the founders are. And I disagree with that. If founders don't want to dox themselves, they don't, right? And no one should force them to. That's the founder's decision. That's the team's decision. And so this is the tricky bit. Is like, well, there are signs that can tell you whether a project is legitimate. There are a lot of signs, but there's a lot of things that a project can do and just sort of not do, rather, and still be an okay project to invest in. So so it always comes back, for me, it always comes back to risk management. And that's the biggest topic of education that I spend my time doing within different servers, is educating people on risk management. And it's a very simple idea if you come from the finance space, if you come from the investment space, stock markets or crypto, or both of them need risk management. Well, NFTs are the most volatile currently because of how young they are. Naturally, they are the most volatile space you can invest in. Just matter of fact. And so some people see that, but don't appreciate what that means. And so I always tell them, well, what's your risk appetite? What's your risk management? If your risk appetite is like you have a lot of money to throw around, first of all, any money you put into the NFT space nowadays, I would say still be prepared to lose it, honestly. So right, never ever put any money into the NFT space you don't have, because you can walk into either a scam. Unfortunately, I did when I started, first started. I think like big YouTubers will all admit, like the first couple of projects that they minted have usually either been complete flops or scams. So what you do is you learn from that, and you kind of look at the signs that, like in hindsight, made it look like that was a scam or made it not look like it was. Again, things like how transparent were they with users? How did were they active in communication, or were they really reserved? Were they how does that Discord communicate? Like, how does that Discord user base look like? Is it just all kind of artificial, like bots just talking with each other, or just like pinging the same random message? Is it are the numbers hyper inflated? You know, are they trying to accelerate their launch because because they just want to grab some money without really putting any substance out there? And so all of those areas are just really big. Like those are areas that you start learning when the more you study the space, the more you look at more like projects, and you look at more and more of them, you start to go, okay, right, I can see, because you watch the scams and you watch the rug pulls, as well as watching the legitimate products, and there are common patterns that you can latch onto. And so there's no substitute for experience, unfortunately, is also the answer here. It's like there's really no there's no shortage of that, but there's no shortcut to that. But think of, I mean, Zeneca is a fantastic leader in the space, and he talks about this a lot. Think of, like, if you want to come into the space, look at the money that you can afford to play around with, right? And look at it as your tuition fee, right? That's how he always has put it, and that really inspired me when I heard that. It's like, think of the first bit of money, like if it's $200 or $300 or $500. Think of that as your tuition fee, right? When I pay for my degree at university, I don't expect to get that money back. What I expect to do is for that university degree to have educated me enough to go and then get a decent enough profession to hopefully make some income make some return on that investment, right? And so even though I haven't gotten like a hard number back from my degree, same with the NFTs. If you put $500 into the NFT space, you're paying for your education. Why? Because it gets you involved, it gets you active in that space, and it allows you to then, actually go through different projects, actually learn what makes a project good and what doesn't make a project good. And to answer your question, there are fundamental pillars. The founders, like I talked about just now, fundamental pillars for analyzing a project and what makes a project good. Look at the founders. Look at the community and the engagement. And I don't just mean like look at the raw Twitter numbers. Sure, like hype is really important to sell the project, but look at actually like how are they engaging on Discord? Discord is the backbone of the NFT community right now, right? Discord and Twitter. Twitter is for all the outreach, but Discord is where the community is formed and where the community lives, right? So go to Discord and watch how that community is building. Is it artificial or is it real? Is it something that you want to be a part of? And thirdly, the utility and their utility and roadmap. What value do they want to provide you? And how realistic is that value that they want to provide you, right? Like, is it gimmicky? For instance, like we've had one project just announced that they're going to shoot their NFT into space on the next SpaceX rocket. Now that's a marketing stunt. That's not utility, right? That's just a marketing stunt. And so be really careful with what you're looking at. It's just like merchandise, sure, if you actually value that merchandise, but if it's just a drop to incentivize you to keep them and you're not actually that into the merchandise, then again, it's just a gimmick. It's just a marketing gimmick. So real utility. What is that NFT going to offer you? Is it going, does it sound valuable? And that's, I think, the core of analyzing any other NFT project is founders, community, utility.
So when you do your own analysis, you come up with very specific numbers when you score projects across those measures and metrics. How do you come up with those scores? What is your system for that?
Yeah, so I've been asked this a couple of times, and the system that I use is actually comes from when I was in software development, and I used to work with kind of security penetration testing firms. And one of the things that you do in penetration testing for software is you start with 100 on each of the areas that you're testing, just 100% score. And then you have, like, again, depends on how you do this, but you have a minor, a medium, and a major fault. And you assign a certain number to each of those. And so, like I said, each of them is 100% to start with. Then you start going through. So I assume that the community is 100%. Then I start going through the community and I look for red flags. In security penetration testing, you look for the vulnerabilities. Is it a minor vulnerability, medium vulnerability, major? In this, it's this is the same way that I do it here with the NFT space. It's like, is this a minor concern, medium concern, or major concern? And that just ticks down the number, basically. And the advantage of doing it this way round is that it actually allows you to it allows you to tackle every project with a really critical mindset, because you're not looking to build the score up, you're looking to take the score down, which allows you to sort of take it from a very critical mindset as you're building it. So yeah, that's essentially, so I'll say like a minor one will take X% away, a medium one would take like more percent, like 5 or 10 or 15, however many percent away. And I'm continuously like reevaluating how I'm doing these numbers, by the way, especially as the NFT space evolves and some things become more important, some things become less important. It's a very evolving space. And then the last thing is, I have 5 categories that I run across, which is the founders. I mean, it's the 3 pillars that we talked about just now, like founders, utility, community, but it's founders, art, community and engagement scored separately, utility and roadmap scored separately, and then the importance of what that NFT means in the current space. Is it like the first one to do something, or is it like, and that's not a unique structure I came up with. Lots of people have had these different sort of these areas to judge. And what I do is I just put a weighting on each of them. So for me, again, founders is really important. So I put a really high weighting on that when I'm working out the final score. Community and engagement, I put a really high score, really high weighting on that. And I put really high weighting on utility and roadmap. I put less of a weighting on art. I put slightly less of a weighting on importance. And I put slightly less weighting on engagement over community.
That's interesting, because so many people just have a very different view, like almost an opposite view of that. They first look at engagement and hype around the project, but that is exactly why then your analysis and your evaluation is very solid, because you just look at fundamentals a little differently. So team is the highest weight for you, the founders.
For the founders, and so for me, the founders are the highest weight, followed by the community, and then the utility. And that has changed over time. Now utility is now equal to community. those two weightings are equal with each other. They're still really high, and then just below founders. And that's changed over time because we've seen founders play more and more. I mean, in the early days, the founders weren't as important in terms of like revealing what they've done or how they've done, but there's also other things about founders. It's not just sort of what background did they have. The basic is that, well, the very fundamental line here is that when you're investing in an NFT project, especially as we come into this sort of like bear market of NFTs and everything's drying out, you have to believe that the team is going to be able to execute on their roadmap. Right. So without solid, when I say founders, I usually kind of mean like the founders plus the whole team. If the whole team and the founders can't, if you don't have faith in them, then you have no faith that they'll be able to execute that roadmap. Right. And so that's why, to me, it is the most important thing to look at and to understand. If I have faith in the team and the founders, then I have faith in the project doing well, because everything else can change. Your community can change overnight. Your engagement could change overnight. Like, you know, it takes a long time to build a solid community to make it really strong, but your engagement can change daily. Your utility can change. You could pivot. But you will not know how to pivot unless you have solid founders, because they will be the ones that have to like actually adapt to the space. And I've just been really fortunate to speak to so many of them now. Like I used to, when I started doing a lot of my analysis, and still for a lot of them now, I will just research them. I'm now also in a really fortunate position where I get to speak to them and interview them. And so I get to find out a lot more about them, and I get to like, and I get to have a much better gauge of their ability and what they're doing and how they're doing it. But even without doing all of that, you're able to look at sort of what have they put out? How are they putting things out? Are they being transparent with their community? Are they running AMAs? I hate projects that don't do regular AMAs, for instance, because I think it's like it's a clear window. For me, they're so valuable. You just sit there and you listen, and it's like almost like having this insight into their mind as to like how they're thinking about the project, where they think it's going to go. And it's like what they're talking about, what are they focusing on? If they're talking about floor price, they don't care about the roadmap. They don't care about how to actually, like, they're obsessed over the short term, and they're not looking to how to execute that project in the long run. So yeah, that's why, to me, that's really, really important.
That's an excellent point. Everything can change, but founders are constant. I absolutely love that point. That's so true and so important to really understand. In terms of spotting red flags, how do you go about it? Feel free to share your screen if you'd like to.
Sure, yeah.
How can we be so smarter about catching those flags early on?
It's it's something that I try to spend a lot of time doing and pointing out to people so that they can be a bit safer in this space, because I feel like once we finally get out of this current out of the current space of where we are literally just throwing money at everything and without the care in the world, we're not paying attention to those red flags. We're just going to keep getting burnt, and more importantly, we're going to keep giving the NFT space a really bad reputation that's going to scare newcomers from coming into it. Exactly. So I'm gonna do a quick. I mean, so I talked about Squiggles. I don't care about bringing them up again, but you can see that they still have about 230,000 followers. They had 250,000 followers almost at launch. So obviously, people don't care about going back and unfollowing these at any given point. But they launched last week. Squiggles is one of the worst examples for me to bring up right now, because I also think it was one of the best executed rugs in history in the NFT space. It was so well done by them that it's really hard for me to go through and point out the usual things that I'd be looking at. But the first thing that you do is, well, what is that kind of engagement? And so I usually just scroll right down to the bottom. In fact, I'll come back to Squiggles in just a second, maybe, but just as a sort of a bit of a heads up with Squiggles, I'll make my point on another one, which is a bit more obvious to spot, and then I'll come back to this, and maybe we can do this together. But let's go to Unscratched. Did they delete their Twitter? Because I called them out as a rug today, sorry, 2 days ago even now, and they have just. I'm glad that people have paid attention. I wasn't the only one that called them out. I started circulating it around that they were going to be a complete and utter rug, and luckily people have caught onto it, hopefully. well, there you go. They seem to have removed their Twitter. But as of about 2 days ago, these guys were getting a lot of following. And the first claim that they had on their thing, and what I actually initially shouted them out myself to early alpha groups, because the point of alpha groups is to catch people's attention, like to flag these products really early so that people have a chance to get in and get their whitelist as early as possible. It's not too competitive. Well, Unscratched had a claim of having a Disney artist on there, and after a very quick and they didn't do much else in terms of backing that up, other than they eventually provided the link to the artist and things like that. And it turned out that it was just a paid docs. Now, the entire engagement for Unscratched was actually very, very simple. It was 5 or 6 posts tops of like the same sneak peek over and over again a little bit, and this concept art. So it's really a shame that they removed their Twitter, so because I can't show you now. But and then just their concept art of going, hey, this is the game that we're looking to build, and that was it. And that's all they kind of really had. And so substance is what I really talk about. Like it's substance. They had zero substance other than just like showing the same thing a few times over and over again. They were very untransparent. The team was not doxed. But they did have a doxed artist. So they were like, oh, okay. When you actually went and dug, like, and you dig a bit deeper because you see these other red flags, you realize that docs is what's called a paid docs, where they just actually pay someone to pretend like they're the artist and pretend to be the real deal. If you dig into that artist, they had no affiliation to Disney, they had no affiliation to Pixar, and so yeah, it's a lot of sort of legwork to try and figure that stuff out. Unscratched again was a relatively okay kind of example in terms of how they've executed but they had next to no proper engagement on Discord. You go to Discord, you have a look at them, and their engagement was just all over the place. They didn't really talk with like the founders and everyone else. They did do a couple of AMAs, but the AMAs, the substance of them was literally just like, yeah, you guys aren't going to believe what we've got coming up. Buy it. It was just hyping it rather than talking about tangible things. And it's just about, it's that tangibility. Look at a project that is like the opposite way. I think Azuki was an interesting example, but actually maybe more so than Azuki, maybe something that I think is oh God, what was another really interesting project that I thought just did this super, super well? Because there's a lot, but Nanopass, I think in terms of their engagement and what they tend to put out is really, really, really good. And it's actually maybe something to sort of like look at a bit deeper with Nanopass. Nanopass has an entirely separate account for their utility. So they put a lot of this effort into like the Nanopass black boxes and how those look and what they're sharing into them and the kind of collaborations that they have. They're doing first of all, they do a lot of collaborations with different people, which is great. And you can sort of like, even before launch, they were doing a lot of collaborations with different people, which again was just something that was really, really refreshing. Like at the time, they were creating lots of hype, lots of energy around what they were building. And they were building a solid community. They cared about the community before anything else. Even though their founders weren't doxed, again, it was a really interesting example. Even though their founders weren't doxed, they were actually very good at what they were putting out and how they were putting it out. Souls, I think, is actually a fantastic example. They're launching in a few days. Souls has, like, again, an example of good project here is that they had to deal with a lot of FUD because they fear, uncertainty, and doubt, for those who aren't aware. Right. They had to deal with a lot because they are actually a failed Solana project that was rugged already. So they had a huge amount of stigma to deal with because they had this association to a project that had failed. And it was this project now, Souls, is actually that taking a lot of that core team of that project who weren't involved in the rug, but were actually, and the fans and the community there, who were really passionate about what they were building and trying to distance themselves away from the bad actors in that team. That's another thing to say, is like not every rug necessarily implicates the entire team. There are, like, for instance, artists who work with projects and are literally just working on art capacity, so they have no idea what the rest of the team is doing. And so they're not being necessarily the bad actors. They're just being in a bad place at the bad time kind of deal. Well, with Souls, that was kind of the deal, is like the art was actually being stolen by the artist that they had originally hired and things like that. So, but they did everything in their power to turn that around. And I really like, I absolutely loved how they did that, because I was one of the first people to like look at them, and I need to warn the communities that I'm with. So I was like, guys, bear in mind that Souls was maybe, you know, was potential, it was spinning off from this rugged project. And actually the founders did everything that they could to explain the situation around that. It's transparency. Lack of transparency in this space, I don't think we should tolerate anymore. We should only look at transparency. These are the three founders all doing a chili challenge that they dared each other to do on video. For the if I think they promised this to themselves, when they hit 30,000 followers on Twitter, they would each eat like ridiculously a couple of 3 chilies or something. And so it's things like showing their faces back up and doing like these silly things to just to kind of engage with the community. But more than that, on their Discord, the community that they were building there, the first time that I even called, like, I talked about Souls, and I was like, guys, because I didn't know much at the time, I wasn't connected to them. I was like, guys, this project is linked to another project that was rugged. And immediately the community at the time was like, Xeppy, you need to go talk to the founders, dude. They're revitalizing this project. They're doing all this stuff. So you could for me, that was like, oh wow, they have a really strong community. I wasn't even part of that community at the time. So then I went and joined, and I talked to them, and I was like, oh wow, they really tried everything in their power. And how did they do it? Transparency. So it just follows that, like, if you have the transparency with your community, if you keep updating them on a daily basis, if you're trying not to really just kind of like create smoke and mirrors. And it's difficult because you have this balance between like needing to make sure that you're not over promising. It's not about like literally, hey, this is like our roadmap with every single detail. You're not going to ever get that, right? Roadmaps and utility is going to should be strong enough to make you understand what the utility is and make you understand that it's realistic, but it should never be so vague that it's literally just like to the moon phase 2, right? Like it should never be that kind of deal. So yeah, I think it's like striking that balance between creating good transparency, and that's what you look out for as a fan. Those are the projects that you go and invest in as a holder. Is you go and look at projects that are doing everything in their power to be as transparent as possible, and just and creating like good collaborations, working with lots of different influencers because the collaborations is another way that you can sort of suss out, like if they're working with a lot of other high profile, high-end projects, you can sort of figure out what their those projects are going to be relatively picky with who they work with. And so you can almost create a network in your mind of like, oh, well, actually, this project only works with like relatively high quality projects. That's another way to just kind of gauge it. But it's not 100%. There are definitely, we've had cases where projects have worked with just like Squiggles, for instance, has worked with loads of really high projects simply because of their Twitter following, right? When they have 250,000 followers, I couldn't blame any project for collaborating with them. Doesn't mean that the project that collaborates with them is a rug, and it doesn't mean that the project that they've collaborated with isn't necessarily a rug. But it's a good indication. The more high quality projects that they're working with, the more of an idea you're getting, because internally, when we're talking with these different projects, we're trying to figure out, is that project a scam? Is it a rug? Is it like we're trying to figure that out ourselves? When we from a project perspective, when we want to collaborate with another project, we're like, okay, how legitimate are they? Because we're staking our reputation on working with them ultimately. And so that's another thing that I think will evolve a bit more in this space. And the community, the other big thing is like, please just be part of the NFT community. Like really go and put yourself into several servers, be really engaged like with lots of other different NFT communities, because that's the best way that you find out about rugs and other things, because no one person has all the time to be able to research all of these different projects and be like, hey, this is a rug, this isn't a rug. It's actually like, no, I have people who will come to me from these communities and go, Xeppy, I've been in this community for like a month, and I think they're looking like a rug, and here's my reasoning. And I'm like, I would not have ever had that insight because I've not been in that community for a month, right? So again, talking with different people, and then and just networking, sharing that information in the Discord groups, in those in alpha groups and Discord groups and different sort of holder communities, and just across the space is how we keep everyone safe. So.
Yeah, I agree completely. I was actually sharing my views regarding that too. This sometimes being in Discord is viewed as grained, as something that is a chore and is unpleasant. But look at it from the opposite perspective. It's a privilege. You are a part of the community. You are an early investor. Imagine if you had an access to founders of Google, founders of Amazon as they were starting. This is the same, right? So just be part of the community, right? It's exactly how you can understand where the project is going.
Exactly.
Anything else you would like to add? Thank you so much for sharing all these insights. Very helpful and very useful.
Yeah, no, always my pleasure. And I can't, on that particular topic of, I think, as I mentioned earlier, the whole NFT space is going to evolve. And I think we're going to see this absolute shift from every project being like having the money thrown at it towards the sort of the tail end of last year, to now projects not even minting out, even projects that would have been thought to mint out. And it's because people are getting wiser, people are getting pickier with their money, and people are getting pickier with the space. It's approaching this, to me, it's looking like akin to something like the .com bubble, where everyone used to just stick the, back in the early 2000s, everyone was just sticking the word World Wide Web or .com or whatever onto, and just calling themselves e-commerce, calling themselves an internet company, whatever that means. And it got to a point where it was unsustainable, and all the money that was flowing into it just, it got pulled, and all those projects went to zero, right? Like a bunch of these projects didn't do anything. So all of them burnt, almost all of them burnt. And then you had a few really big ones that, well, at the time who weren't big, but you had the ones that had proper foundations emerging, the Amazon, the eBay, the PayPal, all of those came out of this entire .com bubble bursting. And the NFT space is in exactly that sort of position. And we're starting to see it. I don't think it's going to be as explosive as the .com bubble, that's for sure, because I think the NFT market is also maturing and building itself better pillars, because we're a completely different time to where we were with the .com bubble as well. So I think we're going to see a bunch of projects who have no fundamentals and are just riding on hype and are just riding on sentiment begin to decline over time. They're going to have this slow die down as people do what? They're going to pull their money. This is the beautiful thing with Web3. And I have to stress to people in Web3, you get to have a say in this new Web3 space. You get to have a say with your ownership of those NFTs as almost like this is your digital sovereignty token as to where, hey, I'm if I really like Azuki, I buy into Azuki because I really believe in that community, right? And that's my vote of confidence, but also my vote of ownership into Azuki. It's decentralized ownership. And so that was the difference with the .com bubble. We didn't have that. Money went into the hands of a few, and those few burnt it to the ground, and that money disappeared. And so investors got really scared, and it was only a few investors investing in it, right? Well, no, now it's everyone has the ability to invest in it. And so it's the people, the populace, that will vote on seeing, they will begin to get wiser, and they will begin to see that some projects have fundamentals. And that's what I mean, go invest in projects that have these true fundamentals, whose team you like, whose utility you like, whose narrative you like, whose community you actually want to be a part of, and put your money there. Right, vote with your money, because when they grow, right, because if you believe in them and they grow, then you also grow with them, right? The value of your NFT increases, and that is another way that you have this shared decentralized ownership of any one project that you're working, that you believe in. You support them in that way. And if you don't start not liking what they do, then again, you can vote, you can pull you can sell your NFT, sell your way out of it, and go, no, I'm going to move my money into another project that I really believe in. And we're going to start seeing that more and more and more, as these projects who have just been built up on nothing but artificial hype and zero substance and zero fundamentals behind them begin to just die out, because, well, fundamentally the team's not going to be able to deliver in the long run. So
absolutely. Thank you so much for this discussion, for your insights, for sharing your knowledge with us, not only today, but every day. I follow you, and I will continue to do so. You are amazing, and I absolutely appreciate everything that you do for us on a daily basis. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you so much for making this available for your community as well, and really championing education at the level that you do, because again, I think it's one of the most important things. So thank you very much.
Absolutely, thanks so much. So for us.